No, I think I completely agree. I think at the moment the St Paul's School USA is striking 35 still, so they're quite high with the rate in this in these kind of conditions. Certainly in a Coxford, you'd imagine that they would be looking at around about 33s to 34s. So, they're still keeping it racy on the return to the catch. So it'll be an interesting one as we're coming through to the regatta enclosure.
And you're right. I mean, these Coxfords, especially at junior level, can be quite heavy boats for these, junior women's athletes to pick up around the front end, and especially if you're rating really high, that can get quite tiring. Especially if these guys have now covered sort of 800, 900 meters of this course, and they've got to push a final sprint in. Have St Paul's School got much further to go up in rate? I don't know. I don't know whether they'll be much more tired than the crew from Heriot have sort of held a bit more of a steady pace throughout the course of the race. They might have a little bit more of a ceiling to reach in that last 200 metre final minute sprint. But I think the Paul's crew now maybe potentially starting to
push away a bit more. I think I'd say that they've just had a 10-stroke move to really open up the distance. So completely shut the door on the George Heriot's boat at this stage.
And I think it's interesting to see that they've got quite a lot of body movement, the USA crew. They're using lots of force to push the boat back through the water, and again it looks kind of a little bit taxing, and again in these heavy boats it will tire them out. So I don't know whether they might get caught out by that a little bit later through the progression of this Junior Fours event by a crew that might just sit up a little more into the good conditions and be a little bit more efficient. But again, they're a very strong crew, certainly. I just don't know how much that strength can push them through all the way to the final. And we're back on the start end of the course there in your bigger picture with an eights event now. So this is the senior eights between Newcastle University and Worcester Polytechnic USA, and it's fast and furious, and there's lots of noise as they come past the barrier point here. And it's still Newcastle University. They've looked really strong throughout the course of Friday's racing, and they're leading currently by about 3/4 of a length.
We're just taking a few of the rates off the start, and you saw that Newcastle had the highest start rate at 43, and you had the Worcester Polytechnic US squad at 40. So it certainly is getting those boats off and running. That Newcastle made every opportunity to get out and get ahead.
And I'll certainly know that Newcastle's coach Alex Lee, been an athlete through the club himself for many, many years, and Newcastle sort of have a bit of a reputation for get out the blocks, leave everyone else for dust, and hang on for dear life. And they're not breaking that mould with this race, certainly, and especially in the eights and the bigger boats, it is all about keeping that rating high. We were talking about the Coxfords maybe having to reserve a little bit more energy in the previous race, but actually in these eights it's about sitting up, it's about being punchy, especially in really good conditions like we've got today. You'll just see there that the Newcastle eight sitting up really nice and tall around the catch, keeping it nice and punchy through the drive, and I think that's just giving them that sort of length and a half advantage that they've got over the crew from Worcester Polytechnic in the USA, who just are looking a little bit more sort of lengthy around both ends of the stroke, and you just can't afford to do that when the margins are so tight in these bigger boats.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'd imagine that this it would seem from looking at this Newcastle crew, this is potentially one of the crews that they're targeting as they're potentially one of their top crews for this regatta, and it's they're looking very punchy, they're looking very long. I know very much from the Newcastle setup is that they like their UT1 training, and really pushing up there with their racy short burst pieces, and they're not afraid to hit it at the front and just accelerate away. So they always have been, Newcastle, and looking at them, they've always been a higher rated crew than you'd see than some of the other universities that you see.
And I think that, you know, for Newcastle to be entering senior eights this year when they've got a top 4 in the senior 4s as well, this is actually their second boat in the event, so very impressive to see them doing so well in another senior event when their top 4 athletes are out of the boat.
Yeah.
And I would certainly say that they're a strong favourite, although this event has been populated quite heavily by the international crews. You know, we saw a draw that was absolutely flooded with crews from the USA coming over to test their women's eights against the best of the British. And in this race, certainly seems that the British have come out on top. But, you know, we've got a day and a half to go yet. We're certainly nowhere near finished. And I think, you know, we've got a sort of full USA heat next between St Joseph's and Northeastern University that's just crashed off the start, so very good timing. So again, it will be interesting to see who will go up to probably face Newcastle tomorrow. I don't want to call the result too early, but I think they've got well enough of a lead through that finish line there to take the win. And off the start, it's St Joseph's University on the Berkshire station on the left hand side of your screen there from the drone. On the right hand side, that's wrong way around. You've got St Joseph's on the right-hand side of your screen, and you've got Northeastern on the left-hand side, who have just taken that sort of length lead off the start there.
Well, I've just taken the rates on that start, and it was impressive from Northeastern that we were looking at the 47 off the start on that, and against St Joseph's 44, and you can see the evidence of that as you're coming away from the top of the island. At the moment, the umpire's pretty happy with both coxswain's lines, and you can see now as they're taking into the next stage of the race, of where they're settling into the race rhythm, is to see how far is these crews going to push it now, because it looks like we're on for a cracking race from the Northeastern University.
Yeah, in an eight, you know, being this far ahead with only sort of less than 500 metres gone even. Very impressive. We're used to very tight racing in the eights events. You know, we were mentioning earlier about small margins when it came to steering and everything. And eight, usually there's not much of a difference in speed like there are with the smaller boats. But I must say, you know, and for those of you who aren't familiar with watching rowing, and welcome if that's you, and you've come to watch family or friends, it's very impressive to see this much of a lead at this point in this senior eights event from the Northeastern crew on the far side. And Northeastern actually, regular attendees of Henley Women's Regatta, they quite often make the trip over here with their top female athletes. Again, like I was saying earlier, to pitch up against some of the best British crews. And actually it'll be really interesting to see the progression for this Senior 8s event, because actually, you know, we saw that very impressive Newcastle crew in the previous event, and if it's this crew from Northeastern that will be up against Newcastle, that will be an absolute stormer. I don't know whether you'd agree, but that will be one to circle in the programme if that's the case. So, and as they pass through in that beautiful drone shot there of the Copus enclosures, they'll be coming towards the bulk of the spectators now through that central part of the race, and it is still the Northeastern crew from the USA that are rowing away into the distance over the crew from St Joseph's. Very sharp, as you can take that shot there from behind the blades. You can just see that sharpness around the catch is probably what we weren't seeing from a lot of the crews earlier, that sort of gives them that edge and that extra speed over the rest of the field. So
it'll be interesting from this race between the St Joseph's and the Northeastern, sorry. They'll be up against Molesey that have had a bye from this round, so it'll be interesting to see how that will pan out later.
Well, that will certainly be a race, as I say, to keep an eye on, because that Molesey crew, they won the Metropolitan Regatta a couple of weeks ago in the sort of senior women's eights events there. They've been tipped as probably the British favourites for this event, I would say, with a sort of unknown quantity coming from the USA. And you know, this is a very strong-looking Northeastern crew from the US, and that race will take place tomorrow at 12:25. So